Hi, we're here with Luc Hove, President and CEO of Imec, to find out more about what Imec's doing and about RTOs in general in Europe. Hi, Luc. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So the first question I have is, I know that you were with Imec from the beginning, and you were there in the founding year of 1984. Can you tell us how that started and sort of how that developed over the years?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, yeah, it was indeed 84 when we started. We had a pretty strong team at the university here in Leuven in Belgium, working on microelectronics, we called it at that time. Now, that was a time in the early 80s where technology was really getting a lot of attention because of the PC that came out a few years before and things like that. So we were growing quite a bit as a university lab and wanted to create like an ecosystem around this university focusing on microelectronics because it was like the high tech of that time. But we realized that we needed quite a bit of investments, which were kind of too big for a university. And that's when Imec was created as a spin-off from the university. And it just happened to be that our government was kind of in search for to set up like a high-tech project. And so those two came together. And that is how we could convince them to kind of invest in us as a spin-off from the university. And that's how Imec was created. We started with a team of 70 people at that time, and we kind of grew the organization year after year. We're now at 5,500 people.
Okay, well, it's impressive. So in 1984, as I recall, that was about 2 years after the IBM PC, something like that, and the Mac was out. During that time, did you have any idea how technology would develop over the next 39 years? What were your feelings about that?
Well, of course, it's always difficult to predict how technology will evolve. But I still remember at the time that, I mean, people were of course, already talking about Moore's Law and kind of were saying, well, maybe we can extend Moore's Law for the next 10 years, but beyond that, it's going to be extremely challenging. There was also this debate at that moment about lithography, for example. Like 1 micron was considered to be like the limit for optical lithography. And I still remember when we designed our first clean room that we kind of designed a very large litho room for E-beam. And we had a very small litho room for optical lithography. At the end, it turned out differently, of course. So it just shows that it's very hard to predict the future. And it's typically always like a 10 years window. But beyond that, it's really hard to predict.
Right. Okay, well, that leads me to the next question. You might not want to answer it, but let's think about 39 years later from now.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, you and I might not be around. But what changes do you think will occur in the next 39 years or in the next 10 years, a shorter time frame in general? What kind of applications? How do you think things will evolve?
Yeah, well, again, it's difficult to predict on the very long future, but I believe that we are going to see an evolution in the next couple of decades. I will say that we will see this continuation of an exponential explosion of technology, I believe, because there's all these applications that require, that result in massive data generation, that require a lot of computation, a lot of AI. And so if you look at the new applications in healthcare, automotive, of course, it's a very big evolution in there already now. But I think in the next 10 years, we will see this transition towards fully autonomous driving in healthcare, much more sophisticated diagnostics, platforms to develop personalized medicine. So I believe that there are going to be so many opportunities, an evolution towards more sustainable foods and farming. But it will all require massive technology evolutions, like these deep tech evolutions, and they all are based on semiconductor technology. I mean, all the activities around AI, generative AI, and all of these things, it will result in a continued exponential, or require a continued exponential increase in technology complexity, and that's going to drive our industry. And of course, if we talk about multiple decades, we will also get into the domain of neuromorphic computing, quantum computing, that will enable then this next wave of exponential technology increase, I believe.
Okay, so part of that innovation in Europe's way of doing innovation relies heavily in the RTOs, research technology organizations like Imec, LATE, FMD, and the others. Europe relies heavily on the RTOs for innovation. How would you say that works in the different, does that work well in the different countries and Europe as a whole? Can you talk about how the interplay between the different RTOs and the industry and things like that?
Yeah, so I think in Europe, the RTO model is pretty well established. I think we found a pretty interesting model to kind of position these RTOs as, on the one hand, as kind of in between universities and industry. But I would also put it a little broader. I think the role Imec has been taking up to a large extent is to kind of bring the entire ecosystem together, to try to innovate in a more network-like model rather than a sequential model where you go from university to maybe RTO to industry, or an evolution across the value chain where you go like from material supplier innovation to equipment suppliers to fab companies to designers to fabless. I mean, the model that we established over the last decades is to bring the ecosystem together and try to accelerate the innovation process, but to some extent also cross-circuit, creating cross connections between all the players in the ecosystem. I think that has turned out to be pretty effective. And in that way, over the last years, Imec has grown into a very unique position. The fact that we are located in Europe, and especially in this very small country, Belgium, has allowed us to kind of take a rather neutral position. I sometimes refer to Imec as the Switzerland of semiconductors, and this has allowed us to really work with all the key players in the world, whether they're in US, in Taiwan, Korea, Europe. I mean, we bring together all the key players here.
Okay, so we know that the entrepreneurial spirit in the United States. Everybody's heard about that. The way they can go out and get $100 million, pretty easily, well, relatively easily. And the United States government invests in military spending, and that goes into technology, and that gives the United States a huge boost. So what about the entrepreneurial spirit in Europe, and especially in Belgium? Because obviously, if we want to face the challenges of the future and we want Europe to be prosperous, that needs to be in place. What can you say? What can be done to stimulate the entrepreneurial spirit in Europe and Belgium?
No, I think this is a very important point. I mean, I just talked about the RTOs, where it's a strong point. I think the entrepreneurial spirit may be a little weaker here, certainly if we compare to Silicon Valley. Now, of course, with the ecosystem that we have been setting up, we are trying to enable a lot of new initiatives, startups, and so on. But one of the challenges for Europe is indeed, I mean, if you compare to Silicon Valley, we don't have the same VC structure, the same capital that is around, especially to create startups, but to scale up the companies to a bigger size. That is one of the biggest challenges. Now, we're trying to counter that by building up initiatives. We have our own fund that we have created, Imec Expand, which helps us to finance some of these startups, and they also, of course, they form alliances with other VCs, and this is how we're trying to address this. And we also, I mean, we should look at this also on an international level, on a global level. I think it's very important that in this context we kind of each region needs to strengthen its strengths, but also connect the strengths. And that's why we're also partnering a lot with, of course, with companies in Silicon Valley, but also with VCs in Silicon Valley. We should not kind of look at it too much exclusively on a regional level.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's good. And speaking of entrepreneurial sort of spirit, what do you see as the big challenges in technology, and let's say the near future, however you define the near future?
The biggest challenges on technology, I mean, I talked about this need for this continued exponential increase in terms of complexity of the systems and the devices that enable these new systems, and that we need this continuous exponential performance increase, let's say, in order to address the challenge that the amount of data that need to be handled and stored and computed, that amount of data is increasing exponentially. So our technology performance needs to increase also in an exponential way in order to be able to process these data in a sustainable way. Otherwise, just if you look at data centers, they will start consuming energy. Energy increase will increase also exponentially if our technology does not improve. Now, to keep on enabling such an exponential complexity increase, I mean, this is really a big challenge. We've been very successful in our industry over the last 50 years in implementing Moore's law, and it's kind of unbelievable that this has been that this has been so well done, basically, and that this Moore's law was so precisely followed. To continue that, given also the limits that we're facing in terms of physics, chemistry, I mean, pushing those boundaries and finding solutions there is enormously challenging, and it's kind of unprecedented what needs to be done. So in order to do that, I mean, the cost of the R&D required to enable that, but also the risks are huge. So only the big players can afford it and can do that. But if the numbers of players is reducing, as I said, the risk is increasing, because if you have a lot of players that can contribute, then yeah, some will fail, some will succeed. If you have a very small amount of players that can maintain this, then the risk is also very high. If there's one error, it may have catastrophic effects. So that's where we are also trying to contribute, again, by bringing together the ecosystem and basically reduce the cost across multiple, share the costs across multiple players, because no single company can drive this roadmap solely. But at the same time, also reducing the risk by looking at multiple options, by bringing the ecosystem together, aligning the ecosystem around a common vision, so that no single company has to do all of that. And I think that's what we see as the challenges, but also the way how we can address some of these challenges.
Okay, well, it's an exciting time to be alive, and we're going to see some of the how these challenges are going to be addressed. A lot by Imec, I'm sure. So thank you very much.
We're trying to contribute.
I'm sure, of course you are, and you're doing a good job so far. So thank you very much for your time, Luc, and thank you everybody for joining.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you. It was a pleasure.